Hi, everyone. Welcome to Dahlia season. How long have we been waiting for this? At least since April in my case, but really probably since last winter. You guys, please welcome Kath. You guys might remember Kath. We had a great talk about dahlias, in winter, I guess, when we were sort of planning for Dahlia
Yeah.
season. But Kath is my fellow Dahlia addict. So thanks for being for talking today, Kath. This is gonna be super fun. So, you guys, I hope, hi everyone, as you guys come in. So nice to see you all. Thank you for coming. So we are going to do questions and everything. We got a few things we're going to share with you, and then, but you'll feel free to leave your questions in there, and we'll get to them as we can. I think we're going to answer a lot of your questions potentially as we talk a little bit here too. But I thought I'd just start by, kind of giving you guys the perspective of where you're at. So the number one question I get asked is, how many dahlias did I plant this year? I think it's about 80, which is a significant decrease over the 100 that I planted last year. It's funny, I don't know where they all went though. It doesn't feel like I have 80 in my garden. And I grow them mostly in the garden as garden plants. They fill up my beds and my borders. And um, uh, Marissa, are you able to share some of those pictures? I just want to make sure you've got screen sharing working for you, Marissa. We have Marissa in the background, you guys. Marissa from Longfield Gardens is in the background, helping us run the background of this so that we can show you guys PowerPoints and presentations and that kind of stuff. So, and she's going to help us field questions too. Yep. So she's running that in the background. Thank you, Marissa. So anyway, I grow most of my dahlias, as garden plants in my garden. And lots of them, and I love them. So Kath, why don't you tell us about your dahlia growing situation as
Well,
everyone comes in?
I'm also down from a peak of 100, but I made it to 63, which I'm quite proud about. And Marissa, if you show the picture of my garden, you'll see that I grow mine kind of differently. I've taken 2 beds from my vegetable garden and devoted them to dahlias. I used to put them in various other places around the garden and property. And this is the place that has the best soil, full sun. And if they don't do well here, I'm just out of options. So this year they've actually done way better than last year. And I think we're going to talk about kind of the differences from one year to the next, which are sometimes inexplicable. Last year, I had some flower. It was very, very dry. I had a few flowers in August. Then it cooled down. And they really started to grow tons and tons of buds. And we had an early frost September 15th.
Oh.
And a killing frost. Everything. It was like 23. And so last year was a total disaster.
Oh my gosh.
And as everybody knows, you wait for 10 months for them, and it's a ton of work. And this is how I start them. I have a little greenhouse, and I started from tubers, some saved over, some I buy new. But that part's a bunch of work. I know you do the same, Erin.
Mm-hmm.
And then plant them out, and the picture on the right is how they looked about 2 weeks ago. So they're even taller and fuller right now.
They look just beautiful. Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that you start them from tubers. I think Kath and I start ours basically the same, most of ours the same way, ahead of time in pots. So for me, that's potting them up mid-April. Is that about the same time you do it, Kath?
Yeah, I'm in zone 4B in northern Vermont. So what are you, 5?
I'm 5. I'm technically 5B. Southeastern Wisconsin, 5B.
Yeah.
So I did grow some from rooted cuttings this year, and I grew some from seed this year. First time ever doing either one of those methods, which has been interesting. The seed ones, just the other day I got my very first seed bloom from seed, and I had gotten a packet of seeds, and I just decided to give it a shot and see how it will go. So but very slow so far is how I would say for that. So I thought maybe because you've already sort of alluded to weather, I think everybody has had, I mean, I don't really know anybody who would say we've had a great weather year. I don't know about you, but just about everybody I've talked to has said they've had some real weather challenges this year.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we've had our plant. We've had them.
Yeah. So for us, that was, we're still in a big drought here. So we have just we're way down on rain this year. And I think it's my most difficult year I've ever had in the garden, actually, because it's been very hot and very dry. And we have the luxury of that rarely being the case here. So I've been spoiled over the years, I think. So a lot of my dahlias are showing some issue. Dahlias and the rest of the plants in my garden are showing some issues related to that. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but I'll just say that basically what I have is they're stressed. So as soon as they get stressed, they are far more likely to get hit by bugs or disease or some other issue. And what I didn't recognize, or didn't really realize, I should say, was that staking was going to be so tied to moisture. It makes sense, but I didn't realize how much more staking I was going to end up doing this year. And I believe that's all because when they were in their major growth period, there was not a lot of water. Now, I do have some. I grow, we're going to hear about your amazing irrigation system shortly. The only ones that I have on drip are the ones that I grow in a skinny bed right alongside the house, which is where I grow most of the bigger dinner plate, so-called dinner plate varieties. Other than that, everything else is just in the ground. And most of that stuff I let handle itself, or I have to do some supplementary watering for that. So tell me about what the weather's been like for you this year, and how things went for you this year generally.
Well, we had a very different year than last year. Last year was hot and very dry. And my dahlias did horribly. Like I said, they didn't really do anything until the very end when it cooled down and we started to get some rain. I've never irrigated any of my dahlias. I've been growing them for, I don't know, 15 years or so. I don't really water anything usually because it's plenty wet here in normal years. But I did realize that after last year that dahlias really like water. I mean, they put on so much growth, and you cut a stem, like one of the big stems, they practically gush water. They just eat a lot. So this spring I put in a irrigation system, just super simple. And because I plant them in rows, it was really easy to do. Whereas the way you plant them, it's much more difficult to figure out how you would do it. Hey, Marissa, do you have the picture of the beds with the irrigation? So that's staking. Let's see. I can talk about that in a second. The next shot is irrigation. Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
So you can see the one on the left at the bottom. There's just like a Y connector coming from a little spout that I have out by the garden, and that's just soaker hose that I got at Harbor Freight. It was like $11 each or something, and there's two 50-foot runs. So what I did is on the right, you can see I just kind of snaked it around the plants, and I would run it for, I have a very low yield drilled well. I can only run the water for about 45 minutes at a time, and then I have to let it recharge. So I would only run it for, I probably total ran it for maybe 6 times for 40 minutes because, of course, this year we had tons of rain.
Well, I'm sure that's all because you put in irrigation.
That's right, of course. So I'm all set for next year or the next year, and but I really do think that if you look at what flower farmers do, pretty much they have their dahlias irrigated. And I think that there's a good reason for that. They just need consistent water, and they need it deep enough, not just right at the surface, to do well.
Yeah, and I think you've nailed you've hit the nail on the head there with the consistent part. It's not that they want like a little bit of water once a week or something like that. Like they kind of want the right amount of water, all the time. They
Yeah.
they don't ever really want to dry out, and they don't ever want to get too wet. They're finicky in that they want it perfect all the time.
I always think of them like tomatoes. You wouldn't let your tomato plant, or you shouldn't let it go dry. You want
Right.
to keep it consistently wet or moist, not wet, and dahlias are the same.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you tell us about what appears to be absolute perfect staking system? Because I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, if you go back one, Marissa. So the nice thing about growing dahlias in a row is it's super easy to put the stakes in. So these are not real bamboo. They're actually plastic bamboo, the ones that appear to be yellow. And then in the middle is a fiberglass pole that they came from some like fencing system or something. I found them in the barn. So I don't know, there's probably a name for this kind of a system of tying. I don't know what it is, but basically I just kind of make a web of using just regular garden twine and kind of try to enclose the plants while they're young into a little web. And then I do one more layer about a foot up, like 3 weeks later or so. And that has kept everybody in place except for probably 3 little fixed tie-ups that I had to do a couple weeks ago. So really low maintenance. Works
and
really
so there's
well.
a little stake in the center of that, it looks like. So where they cross, there's a small stake in the center of that then?
Which really doesn't do much. It's kind of just something to wind the string around so you go to the next one. The support is really provided by the bigger, they're probably 3/4 inch maybe. And they're about 5 feet tall. And I just push it. The nice thing about the garden soil is I can pretty much push them in.
Yeah.
So this is probably the 4th year I've used this technique, and it works really well for me. I don't know how you'd really convert this to your kind of planting situation, but if you have the luxury of having a row of dahlias, this works pretty well.
Yeah, I like the way that looks a lot. So along the skinny bed that I have along the patio, where I plant, it's south facing, and I plant a row of dahlias right along the side of the house there. Those I just do sort of a Florida weave method. So in between each one, there's a post, and then I just weave twine. Actually, I only do in front of those because they're not going anywhere from the back because they're against the house.
Yeah.
So because of that, they don't need a ton of support because they're so protected from the house. It's more of a just keep them generally going in the right direction, and that works well there. For the ones that I have in the garden, the bigger ones, I start with a stake right from the get-go because I just know that they're going to need it. Now, most years I'm able to get away with things that are, even 32 to 36 inches, I can sometimes get away without a stake.
Yeah.
This year that was not the case. So everything, I kind of just did the one stake, and I try not to go down the center of the plant because I don't want to spear the tuber, obviously, which is why it's better to stake before you actually stick them in the ground. And then what I do is I just try to wrap that foliage around there to kind of hide that stake. And then there's just black twine. And I was telling Kath just before that when I take my garden apart this year, there's going to be like 4 miles of black twine that come out of it because everything is staked to within an inch of its life, unfortunately, this year. So that was.
Why do you think things got so tall if it's been so dry?
I don't think they got taller. I just think that they're weaker stems.
Oh.
I just think the stems were just are not as strong as they have normally been for me.
Yeah.
So, Kath and I had sort of talked about some things we wanted to touch base on, and we had discussed that Kath's apparently your staking and your irrigation. So we sort of filed that under a success. And I would say for me, despite the challenges we've had, my ball dahlias have been doing really, really well. We've got ball dahlias everywhere, which is great since those are my favorite types. In fact, I cut a bunch of things here, and I will just see think I grabbed a Wizard of Oz here. And I'm just gonna call out Wizard of Oz. This is Wizard of Oz right here. See if I can get in the center there. Because I keep saying sort of disparaging remarks about Wizard of Oz because I just don't, it's just not necessarily my color palette. This cool blue, I've got so many warm tones in my garden that I think it would work. I just needed it farther away from the other things. But what I would say about Wizard of Oz is it produces flowers like almost no other dahlia I've grown yet. So that one did well, but really all the ball dahlias have been doing really good. Linda's Baby, Crichton Honey, all of those. So I would say for me, it's a great year for the ball dahlias. They have been pumping out blooms, a lot of them for a month now, I would say 3 weeks at least. And now they're just really going to get into it now. So it's going well. What about challenges though, Kath? What are some of your challenges that you've been dealing with?
Well, last year, as I said, I had so many that didn't bloom at all. And this year I have a whole section of singles and collarettes. And I've only had probably 3 blossoms out of 6 plants, 7, 8 plants. This is Kelsiani Joy. That's the one flower I got out of that plant so far. Do you have that one too?
Yeah, this is that same.
Yeah,
I just cut those. Yeah,
it's so pretty.
It is really pretty.
But I can't explain what the heck is going on with those plants because they're just not flowering.
Because normally it's those singles.
I know.
And maybe to a lesser extent the collarettes, but it's those singles that just never stop really pumping out the blooms. So that's interesting that it's been a problem.
So just for people to know that, dahlias are mystifying. I mean, if they're not doing what you think they should be doing, you're not alone. Everybody's probably having the exact same experience on some level.
Right.
So maybe they're going to pull it together and bloom like crazy in the next couple of weeks before we get a hard frost, but I don't know. And the other thing I was just going to say is because I'm getting so many flowers, the deadheading is a job. I mean, I have to deadhead like every other day at the
wow.
And what I was just going to say is it's been really hard because we have so many bees this year, and hummingbirds. There seems to be like something happening with the hummingbirds. There's babies everywhere, and I wonder, do you know if someone's been impaled by a hummingbird? Because they fly like right.
Yeah, they do fly. They'll come up and stare you in the eyeball.
Well, that's one thing, but these are like, and I just like you could die. I think I don't know, but anyway, so ducking for the hummingbirds while I'm deadheading, and then also just I feel bad taking the spent dahlias are the ones, especially like the balls, for instance, that they reveal the center, and that the back leaves or petals are going to start to fall off. But I hate taking them off because they're just covered with bees. So it's not really a problem, but I don't know. It's a thing I've been experiencing this summer is how to cut those dahlia heads off and deprive the bees of all the fun they're having.
But it's so, and the worst part, that's the thing though. For anyone who's growing dahlias, you have got to stay on top of the deadheading because that's the only way you're going to get more flowers. So, and I will deadhead. Sometimes it's easier for me to go through the garden and deadhead almost everything. So if there's anything that's even like halfway gone, if I know it's going to be gone by the time I come back in 3 days or whatever, then I just take it right away. And I'll put those in bouquets sometimes. They won't last more than a day, maybe 2 if you cut them past their peak. But at least I enjoy them for a little bit because they got to come out of the garden at that point.
The other thing I was going to mention about deadheading is I've found that sometimes I'll miss something and there'll be a spent flower bud down in the plant a little bit deeper. And if you see that one of your plants is not blooming that well, sometimes I'll dig around in there and there'll be a spent, one of those kind of translucent conical heads down in there, and or a flower that's just kind of fallen apart. And I think going after those, just kind of really looking carefully for stuff that's not always obvious. It's good to get those out of there. That's
a fabulous tip for sure. I'm just going to quickly, I just saw a question go by, and we are going to circle back to a lot of questions, but I just saw someone ask for the best source to obtain dahlias for Zone 7B. So you guys, Kath works with Longfield, but Longfield Gardens is also where I get most of my dahlias from, and they have a great selection of them. So do check there and see, any dahlia will work in 7B. So, so that would be a place to start.
There's no shortage of dahlias.
No, there is not. So as far as challenges, I would just say that for me, obviously, I think I've already hit upon the main one, which is the weather. But the weather is just the start of it, because what that led to was insect pressure that I have never experienced on my dahlias before. First of all, still Japanese beetles here. Even today, just as I was picking this bouquet, I was picking Japanese beetles out. I have never had Japanese beetles in September here. There's not a lot of them, but they came hard and furious this year. And I think Japanese beetles are just mostly just completely obnoxious to have to deal with. And they can damage a flower so quickly. I've also had, I've got a bit of spider mite situation going on right now. That's sort of presenting as kind of mottled yellow leaves, and you can kind of flip the leaf over and you can kind of see them, especially if you get in there with, like, zoom your phone in, you can get in there. I've been treating those with horticultural oil, but also just checking on them, and I peel off the bad leaves as I see them, or you can cut them if you really have to. You can cut them back. What you want is to try to get some fresh, clean growth there, because otherwise they just sort of perpetuate the problem. And then I think Marissa has a great picture of the powdery mildew storm that's happening in my garden. So you guys, I have never, ever, ever had powdery mildew on my dahlias before, but I'll tell you about this. So this is on Joey Morella, and I actually have Joey Morella in here. So I'll show you that despite the fact that he's dealing with some serious powdery mildew issues, here's some beautiful blooms from that. So the perfect storm here was that it was super dry, and I got behind on my watering. And by the way, we're also dealing with, somehow it manages to not rain, but also be extremely humid. So in order to try to catch up on the watering, I did, what is not at all recommended, and I put the sprinkler on because I could not keep up with the hand watering. So now I am watering things, and these are in the circle garden. So I don't ever overhead water the stuff in the patio garden, but the circle garden kind of gets wrapped up in a larger area. So anyway, overhead watered, which basically means that between the high humidity, the stressed plant that was already really dealing with some drought, and then I put overhead water on those leaves, I created literally the perfect storm to grow powdery mildew. So there's powdery mildew for you. Dahlias can get mildew, and it looks pretty ugly. Peel off the leaves, and there is a fungicide. Oh gosh, now I'm forgetting the name of it. I'll try to look it up and mention it in a bit, but it's a very simple organic fungicide that you can treat with. To be honest with you, you catch it early enough and you clean up those leaves, it doesn't really spread. And I find that the plant still grows fairly well, even there. So those are just some of the challenges that I dealt with this year, but it was the most challenging year I've had for dahlias, which is just such a bummer when, like you said, you spend so much time. I mean, my whole garden is kind of focused around dahlias. So it's a bummer when that happens.
I wanted to mention too that I didn't say anything about fertilizing, but after having such a bad year last year, I did a soil test at the university, and it came back that they don't test for nitrogen because nitrogen is so fleeting. Right. But I was way too high in phosphorus and potassium. So I think that comes from, using a liquid fertilizer on the garden for years. Sometimes I use a granular fertilizer, but I stopped that about 5 years ago because I had a soil test then when it was also too high. And so I just was fertilizing with a liquid soluble fertilizer. Well, I figured out I'd better not to be doing that. So I bought a bunch of gallons of fish emulsion, and I've only been giving them nitrogen. And not the last month or so, but the first half to 2/3 of the season, I watered them probably every 2 weeks with fish emulsion. And I think it really did a lot for them. I think there's so much different controversy about whether you feed dahlias or don't feed dahlias and what you feed them with and all that stuff. And I just wanted to say that I used fish emulsion this year and it worked really well.
That's really interesting. It
may never work again. I don't know.
Right.
But I don't know that it worked. It seemed to have really helped them out.
That's really interesting. I usually do fish emulsion, especially when they're right in the beginning, right after I plant them, I'll do some fish emulsion, and then I usually switch over to seaweed fertilizer for them. But that's interesting. But I don't do it a lot. I do it every 3 weeks max, I would say is what I do. But that's interesting. Well, maybe I'll try that next year, because that's interesting that you had. I would say, you guys, if you are fertilizing dahlias, though, go easy. Do not overdo it, because I think you can do way more harm than good with fertilizer if you mess it up.
This was a pretty dilute mix.
Right.
And I completely agree. You can. Obviously, I have overdone it in the past, because it's really hard to get all those extra nutrients out of the soil once they're in your soil.
Yes, you're right. It is. I mean, there aren't a lot of ways to actually do that. So
right.
Potassium bicarbonate, you guys, is what is, and I just bought that on Amazon, and you mix like a teaspoon to a certain amount of water, follow the directions, or half a teaspoon and a little bit of soap on there, and you just kind of spray it lightly on the leaves. And it is organic, or approved for organic growing. So and I'll just mention that North Lawn Flower Farm, who I'm happy to see here, mentioned putting bags over dahlia buds, which is great. And of course, she's growing beautiful flowers for people to buy. I would probably lose my mind if I tried to bag everything. But if you have a really special flower that you want to protect, it's pretty much a foolproof way to manage that. So yep. So there's that. What do you think? Should we talk about some of our favorites this year?
Let's.
All right, you can go first.
Oh, all right. So we have some pictures for you, and I also have some samples. I wanted to talk about Milena Fleur, or however you say it. The first year I've grown that. These are photos I took in my garden this year. So I'm not a person who likes pink, and I think it's really funny that these first 3 are all pink, because I really am not into pink that much. But this Milena Fleur is very soft, and it has this neat kind of yellowish stripe cream thing going on, and I think it's really beautiful. And they change the bud or the flower in the front is young, and then as the flowers get mature, they get larger and fuller and more fully pink. But they start out this really beautiful kind of striped look. I really like it. And let's see, you can't see these. Probably the photos are better. Lifestyle is a anemone flowered dahlia. The first one I've grown. They have not really appealed to me in the past. But I have to say, I really like this one. It's blooming beautifully. It has this kind of interesting foliage that's, you see it's kind of jagged. The leaves are thinner, and the plant itself, I think, is really pretty. It's producing a ton of flowers. And we were talking about this before, and Erin, you were saying it looks a lot like poka.
Yeah, here I have a poka. I have poka right here. It's a little chewed up in one corner, but this is the flower on poka, so it's very similar.
Which may be a little more reflex. The lifestyle is pretty flat.
Yes, and I think it looks like this one has kind of a bigger center piece on it than maybe lifestyle does. Yeah.
Anyway, really pretty, even for a non-pink lover. And then Stolz von Berlin is, I think it's classified as a ball. It's quite small. The flower is about 3 inches across, maybe. But there's something about the petals and the way they're formed. They're like a funny shape, like a cornucopia or something, and it has this really unique look. And there's a ton of flowers, and they're a nice size for mixed bouquets because they're not that big. So it adds some contrast. So I'm pretty happy with those, all three of those.
Those are beauties. So the first, well, these two, I actually picked these two because I think they look so good together. So this is the dark purple one here is Thomas Edison. It's funny, Kath and I are sharing we're sharing all the colors we don't normally like. I do not care for purple. I like some purple in the garden, but I didn't actually, someone actually gave me this tuber last year. And it is a stunner. Now these are smaller flowers than you would normally get out of it. Sometimes the flowers kind of get smaller as it goes a little bit. So, but they're kind of nice when they're this size because they do work into a bouquet. But I actually have Labyrinth and Thomas Edison growing next to each other, and I think they work so well together because Labyrinth really has that kind of purpley center on it. Now Labyrinth I've talked about so many times in the past, but Labyrinth was after I fell in love with Cafe Au Lait, then I really fell in love with Labyrinth. And the thing about Labyrinth is obviously much more saturated colors, but it produces so many flowers on one plant. I just find it to be prolific. So I'm a fan, and I like those peachy pink, yellowy sort of sunset colors is sort of what I love about it. So those are my first two that I'm really loving this year.
I think the petals of Labyrinth are particularly beautiful too because they're kind of twisty.
Yes.
It gives a lot of volume and interest.
Yes, I love a twisty petal on a dahlia. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Let's see, other ones I had. The next ones, the group of three I have next are all ball dahlias. Erin and I seem to be in a ball dahlia.
Yeah, we are both in a ball
together.
We'll
leave it at some point, I'm sure. But anyway, I included Cornell Bronze, which is similar to Cornell. Cornell is a red ball dahlia. Cornell Bronze is significantly larger. I have, let's see, I have a flower of it here. Well, you're not going to be able to see it anyway. It's probably a good 4 to 5 inches across. They're really large and they're so dense. They're just.
I love those. I have that somewhere in my garden. I think I've lost track of it, but I know I have it and I love it.
It's so beautiful. The next one is Brown Sugar, which is new for me this year. You can see the foliage is kind of darker than average. It's so hard to take a picture of this one. It's the coolest color. I don't know. Brown Sugar kind of is a great name for it. It's dark orange, rusty kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
I like oranges a lot. This is just such a unique color. And I'm in love with that. And then the last one's Jomanda, which I've grown that for a couple of years. Do you grow that, Erin?
I do, yes.
Yeah. It's so many flowers. And a really nice size. It's kind of between Brown Sugar and Cornell in size. And it has that kind of, it's peachy, but it's got a little bit of violet in the middle, which makes it work really well with lots of stuff. So I'm a big fan of that one.
Those are all wonderful. I love all those.
So if you haven't grown ball dahlias before, I'd say the advantages of them, they're very prolific bloomers. The flowers last much longer, in my opinion, than most other dahlias, both on the plant and in a bouquet. And if you're doing any kind of flower arranging that's going to travel, they're really awesome because the petals don't bruise. They're wound up so tightly that they just kind of bounce off each other. And so they're very durable. And I think that's one of the reasons flower farmers like them so much.
Yeah, those are such great points. I also think that I think you mentioned this before with another one, they're a nice size that most of them. I mean, obviously they vary in size, but most of them are a nice enough size to be able to put into a bouquet. I mean, we all sort of love the big dahlias, but they are not easy to work into a mixed flower bouquet.
Yeah.
So these work so well with so many other flowers.
Very true.
So we're going to talk some more about ball dahlias because
and then we'll stop.
Basically, that's all Kath and I talk about is ball dahlias. But if you guys have been following me for any amount of time, you know that I love these. And what's interesting is that I'm mentioning both of these. They are so similar. So in fact, I picked both of them and I sat here going, well, which ones are which? Because that's how similar they are. Now, I'm pretty sure that these are all, you can see on the right there, pretty sure these are all Crichton honey. So Crichton honey varies from a salmon color to a light yellow, depending on how much sun they're getting. And then they change colors quite a bit, but there's more of a kind of a honey tone to them in general, I think. And then Linda's Baby, and I think these are all Linda's Baby, has more of that consistent salmon color. I don't think that you probably have to grow both kinds because they're so similar, except I would say that the one thing I like about Crichton honey is that it's about a foot shorter than Linda's Baby is. So to me, it's easier for me to work in more towards the front of the border than Linda's Baby, which I think Linda's Baby, I'm looking over there right now, that's a good 3.5 feet tall, probably, if not a little bit more. So I find Crichton honey to be a little bit easier just to work into because I grow them in my garden. Probably, I mean, Crichton honey is a big love of mine, but I think color wise, I actually probably prefer Linda's Baby, to be perfectly honest. So those are two of my balls that I do this every time.
Two of your balls,
dahlias,
yeah,
that I'm quite happy with.
I have Linda's Baby here. For me, it's very pink.
Yeah.
It's
so you're seeing, and this one is sort of more of that tone. So you're seeing a lot of pink. See, and this is, I guess, pink to peach, sort of reminds me of the color of my bedroom when I was in 8th grade. So what's your next 3?
Let's see. I have the next 3 I called them comeback favorites. These are ones that I usually have about, I don't know, maybe a third of my dahlias are new to me each year. And then I have some that I could never live without, and then some that I kind of try again. These are some that I didn't have recently. American Dawn, I don't know why I didn't have it last year. Should never be without this dahlia. It's just such a good performer. You can see the number of flowers on that plant. We'll talk a little bit later about good dahlias for having in a perennial border, and this is on that list, so I'll hold on that for a little bit. But super beautiful. If you haven't grown this, again, it's pink. What am I doing? But it's kind of corally pink. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm not going to apologize for it. Cafe Au Lait I grew this year. I hadn't grown it for a couple of years because I was just like, you don't get as many flowers from a dinner plate typically. And the color is so variable. Sometimes it's buff, sometimes it's pink, sometimes it's like dark pink. I mean, but I put it in here because here's a picture from a couple weeks ago. And when they bloom, they're just amazing. And if you get 3 or 4 of them at a time and you put them in a vase together, it's just like you feel like you just won the lottery. So I don't know. It's probably going to be one of those ones I grow every couple of years because right now there's only 2 flowers on 4 plants. So she's a bit of a prima donna. Zundert Mystery Fox, I know you're growing that too, Erin, and it's just look how rusty yours are.
We've been talking about the color on this, but I think that's probably why it's called that because of the color variation in it.
Yeah. So this picture shows it in its mauve phase. Often you'll find on the same plant the range between mauve and rusty, which I think is really cool because you can kind of pick the flower you want that goes with the bouquet you're making. The flower size is nice, which you can tell on the ones Erin's holding. Yeah. Mine are a little bit smaller than that, most of them. And it's a ball, but it's not quite as round as some of the balls. So it has a little bit flatter face, blooms a ton. It's not very tall. Is yours tall?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say it's in that 30 to 36.
Yeah.
It's probably more like 30 for me, 35 maybe.
Mine too, which is nice for a border or for somebody who just doesn't want to get into a lot of staking.
Right.
Because I think it's one you wouldn't really have to stake.
Yeah.
So those
when I started growing that, I was like, oh wow, it's like I'm growing another orange dahlia. But then, so I was like, oh, I'm not sure if this one's really for me. And then I started watching, and how it changes color as the blooms develop is pretty miraculous. And this is actually, and it gets like, I gotta find the camera on this one, but it gets, it's got sort of yellow gold tinges on the petals on this one. I don't know. I think it's appropriately named because you don't really know what's going to happen.
I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
I can't figure out the camera.
I know it's hard to figure out which way we are.
But these are from the same plant, and one is mauve and one is kind of not. I think you had a few more, right?
Yes, I do have a few more. So then, so first of all, I always feel like it's worth mentioning. We've sort of talked about it, but I always feel like it's worth mentioning HS date. So, HS this. So there's the HS series, which stands for Happy Single. There's a whole bunch of them in it. I've grown 3 different ones from it, and HS date is, in my opinion, the best of the bunch. The flowers will start kind of a deep orange. Oh my gosh, I really don't understand how
it's hard
mirrors work. They start kind of a deep orange, and then they sort of fade out to more of an apricot color. But the thing with these single dahlias is that once they get going, they just keep, as long as you keep up with the deadheading, which you have to do. For those, I deadhead basically every day. Every time I walk by, I'm cutting off the spent flowers. As long as you keep up with the deadheading, those go. But even though I've had all these issues with staking this year because of the drought, these have never needed staking in my garden. So that, and they also have this kind of olive green foliage, but when you look at it from afar, it doesn't really look olive green. It looks like almost black foliage. It's very dark. So the foliage is really pretty to work into a border. So I mean, I can't, and since it's open center, the bees and the butterflies adore it. So there's so much good happening with HS date. I'm also last well in a vase for me. The next one is it is KA's Mocha Joe. Now KA stands for Kristen Albrecht, and I think she's over maybe like Washington State, West Coast area. She's a dahlia breeder who's coming out with some kind of interesting things, and her dahlias are difficult to find. I had to buy this one from a rooted cutting because they're just not in wide release necessarily, but she's doing some really interesting breeding. I think she is mostly breeding, by the way, for the cut flower industry. So sometimes these are pretty tall. I mean, that's the one complaint I would have, is that they're tall and a little floppy. So perhaps not the best choice for a border like I grow them, but worth growing. But I just love the colors on them because the colors are very sort of a muted pink. It actually reminds me a lot of a Cafe Au Lait kind of coloring on these. And lots of blooms. However, the most eaten plant by the Japanese beetles in my garden. So I don't know if that's specific to the variety or specific to the plant, but thought it was worth noting. And then the last one, I don't actually have one blooming right now because this is this Anemone Dahlia that I'm growing this year for the first time, called Platinum Blonde. And I haven't gotten a lot of blooms off it, but what I have gotten is so fun and so neat. And it's a very moderately sized plant. So I wouldn't say it's performed fabulous for me, but I'm going to keep trying it because I love it so much that I think if I can get a lot of blooms out of it, that is well worth the effort. It's very, very good looking Anemone Dahlia.
Isn't it funny how years ago, I would never have grown an Anemone Dahlia or a collarette, and now I'm just all about them.
I know, right?
Go figure. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's funny how tastes change, but I think some of that happens when you Like for instance, like with the I couldn't have imagined myself growing a single either, really. And then you find out how well they perform, and what I love about the singles is that no one, unless someone's really into dahlias, they don't know it's a dahlia. So they're like, oh, what's that orange daisy you have growing over there? Because they're not used to that. So that's always sort of fun. Do you want to hit on quickly a couple of your picks for really good dahlias for working into your garden?
Yeah, I think we talked about this before, and I think we have the same picks.
Yeah, we do kind of.
So we had HS Date, which for all the reasons you just talked about. American Dawn, so prolific of a flower bloomer. It has a big presence because the flowers are probably 5 inches across, maybe even 6. They have these dark purple stems, and the foliage is also somewhat dark, but the dark stems that are just so wiry and strong. A dahlia you never have to stake, just holds those flowers up no matter what. Really has a beautiful presentation, the plant itself. And the flowers I also think are beautiful. So I definitely recommend that. And then the other one I wanted to mention is another, I guess it's a semi-double, Bishop of Llandaff, a really old variety, almost black foliage like HS Date. And I just, in a flower border, I just think that dark foliage is so beautiful. And the flowers are this electric red that's like the color of Crocosmia lucifer. It's just that, like, whoa, hard to take a picture of. But the bees love it, and it also does really well in pots. I've grown it in containers before, and it's a 30 inches, maybe sometimes taller. So you concur with these, or you have some other ones?
No, I do concur with those, and I just want to reinforce that idea of the dark foliage, because that's another element. So if you're working it into your garden, a lot of times we don't have a lot of that. So even when they're not producing flowers, which I also find that HS Date, and I can't remember, it's been a while since I've grown anything in that Bishop series, but HS Date is often the very first, in fact it was again this year, the very first dahlia to bloom in my garden. So, but even when it's not blooming, before it does that, at least with that foliage growing, you still get a nice element in a garden border to add something to it other than just more sort of generally green foliage. So I agree with all those. And of course, you guys know that this is primarily how I grow Crichton honey, which is masked at the front of my border. So I like that one. It's a difficult one to find though, so I'm always a little reluctant. For whatever reason, Crichton honey is a little challenging to find. But a shorter growing, I mean, my main criteria for things like that is ideally you're looking for something that's 30 inches or less. Right. I think, so that you don't have to worry about, if you start sticking your 5 foot tall dahlias in there, that changes the nature of what you have to do to get in your border and take care of them. So.
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember, you need to be in there almost every other day to deadhead or tie or something like that. And if you're having to fight your way to the back of the border to deal with them, it's just no fun. Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, Marissa, do you want to queue up some questions for us? Because I think we're going to try to get through some questions. So Susan from Utah wants to know about, we talked a little bit about this, and Kath, maybe you just want to quickly give a quick synopsis of what you did this year for your dahlias.
Right. I used dilute fish emulsion, but I had done a soil test and saw that I already had lots of potassium and phosphorus in the soil. So, I've been gardening for 35 years. I don't do a soil test every year, but it's good to do it every couple years. I don't know why it's so hard to do it. I don't know. There's been many years when I haven't. I've gone for a long time, but it's the only way you can really tell what's going on. And after having a bad year, which I had last year, I knew it was partly the weather, but I also wondered if was it the soil. And so if you are having a difficult year, you might want to do a soil test and kind of get a baseline of where you're at. I also found that my soil was too alkaline, which is interesting because
that's a big issue. That's a big issue for me too. Yes.
Our base soil is very acidic, but we had a wood stove for many years and threw wood ash on there for years. And although I haven't put any on for probably 8 years, you can change the pH of your soil dramatically unintentionally, and it has a long-lasting effect. So this year I actually put on some what was it, an acidifying thing of some kind. I can't remember what it was. It was organic something, but put some of that on there, and I put some blood meal on at the beginning of the season because it's high in nitrogen. And then once I got going, I did use the fish emulsion, and it seemed to work pretty well. But it's hard to make a recommendation. I guess, I just would say, in my experience, dahlias need nutrients. They get big fast, and they need to eat to do that.
Right.
So
great suggestion, though, to do the soil testing. I think that's, and your success this year, I think, bears out how important it is. So good.
Earwigs. Oh my gosh. Oh,
they're so gross.
They're my biggest pest, honestly. They do so much damage. And this year I used this. I also have slugs early on, slugs and snails. And so I got Sluggo Plus, which does earwigs too, supposedly, deals with earwigs. And what it has in it is spinosad. That's the thing that controls the earwigs. It was so wet here, though, that I would sprinkle on these granules on the soil surface. I went through like 3 bottles of this stuff because as soon as it rains, the little granules swell up and kind of dissolve. Yeah. And so I was doing it once a week early on because honestly, it was wet and there were just so many earwigs, and they eat the buds. They're a mess.
Well, and early on, if those come when the dahlias are young, that basically can take out a whole dahlia pretty quickly. If by destroying all the foliage, it really gets a rough start to it if it's early in the season.
Right. So I think I didn't really realize it was spinosad in there until later, at like the 3rd bottle. And next year I use spinosad on my lilies to control the lily leaf beetle. And I may try spraying the dahlias next spring rather than using the pellets. But I would recommend, at least as a start, the Sluggo Plus. You just have to keep after it.
I think Bonide has a product called Bug and Slug Killer as well, which is essentially the same thing. So if you can't find the Sluggo Plus, I think that is the same thing, basically.
But buy it in like March before everybody gets
right. Yes, before everybody else is dealing with it. So Debbie has this great question, and this is a question I've been getting a ton of.
Yeah.
So if you have a dahlia and you've got lots of leaves but no flowers, so basically your checklist for dahlias is, is it in enough sun? You basically need at least part sun for dahlias. Did you fertilize a lot with a super high nitrogen fertilizer, like maybe even like a like a chemical synthetic fertilizer or something? Of course, anytime you throw a load of nitrogen at a plant, it's going to produce a whole bunch of leaves, sometimes at the expense of flowers. Sometimes it depends on the variety that you're growing. I mean, a lot of times those big dinner plate dahlias take a very long time to produce their first flower. And in fact, sometimes there are some that I have not seen yet, and there's buds, but I haven't seen those yet. So sometimes it just is a matter of time for that. Kath, anything else that you think might be an issue with that?
I want to mention weather.
Right.
Because dahlias, they don't like really hot weather. I know that people are able to grow them in the South. That amazes me, because when we have really hot weather, my dahlias stop blooming. And they also like cool nights, which is why they do so well usually in the Northwest, because they have, it's sunny. The days can be warm, but the nights often get really cool because they're by the ocean. And that's really, you never see dahlias better than in the Northwest. And that's why they grow so well there. So in a place like here, it's it's pretty cool where I live. But the nights this summer, there were plenty of nights where it didn't get below probably 75, which is unusual for us. But they really prefer nights in this like 65. So sometimes if the weather just isn't cool enough at night or too hot during the day, they will stop blooming. And what sometimes happens, I know some dahlia growers in the South, they basically just try to keep their dahlias alive in the summer and wait until the fall. And when the fall comes is when their dahlias really flower. Correct me if I'm wrong, if people are watching from the South and have a different story. But from what I understand, once the weather cools down, I've certainly seen it happen. They bud up when the nights get cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's why dahlias are really, why they're really coming into their own just like now, is
Right.
because a lot of us are having, we are probably having as much as 15 to 20 degree differential between night and day, and we're hopefully past the 90s at this point.
Right.
So absolutely.
Right.
So a good question: when do you dig up your tubers? So first of all, about the digging tubers. You don't have to do that in every area. Kath, what do you say is the zone? I just talked to somebody today who told me she's in 6B and left her dahlia tubers in last year and was shocked that they came back, although it had been a very mild winter.
Yeah.
But I usually say zone 7 and up and in 7 you need to offer some winter protection to not have to dig them. Do you think that's right?
I think that's what we usually say 7 and up. But if it's a mild winter, you can get by with 6. If it's a really cold winter, you might get surprised and have them freeze. But there's a article on, I know you have a bunch of stuff about digging dahlias, and so do we on our website, just kind of a step-by-step about when to do it, how to do it.
Yeah, they have great, so check out the Longfield Garden website. They have some great ones. The short answer is that you ideally want the foliage to die back from a frost and then dig them, but you have to sometimes just sort of pay attention to it because if it's a really hard frost, you could lose them. So once again, nothing's totally black and white with dahlias, is it?
Right, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm wanting to try dahlias zone 4B, like the HS series, and look at ball dahlias. Yeah, so I would say try them all. Don't limit yourself to one.
Don't ask us about that.
Right. Clearly you're talking to two people who have no control whatsoever when it comes to, you should see some of the emails that go back and forth between Kath and I in maybe about January about what dahlias we just have to have. There is no self-control. But I would say I really think that HS date, if you're really just going to pick one, something in that HS series, if you like the look of that one, and that's going to work in your garden, I think that's a good one to think about doing, because it just really doesn't require a ton of maintenance in terms of staking or anything like that. Anything else, Marissa, that you want to put up? There we go. We just kind of talked about this a little bit. Do you have to wait for a freeze to dig tubers?
The answer is no, because there's plenty of places that don't get a freeze.
Yeah.
So it really depends on where you are. But ideally, they're going to have a time to cool down, because that's when they start to set their eyes. There's no short answer.
Yeah. What I find with dahlias is that there's a lot of, I think there's probably some sort of optimal thing to do to dig them and store them and whatever. And as close as you can achieve to that is great.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of wiggle room in there. There is a lot of wiggle room for and there's so many different ways to store. So it's clear that there's not one way to deal with it, for sure.
Yep.
So, Mindy, what's the perfect condition for dahlias? You're the one fighting to get to the back for your 8-foot dahlias. So, perfect condition for dahlias is, sun, consistent moisture, rich but well draining soil, a gardener who deadheads regularly and stakes appropriately when they should. What else would you say?
Waters
Right. Yep,
consistently.
absolutely consistent water all the time. Yeah.
But I think that read the descriptions of the varieties that you're shopping for. Don't get complete. I mean, look who's talking, but there are dahlias that are 30 inches tall. There are dahlias that are 5 feet tall. There are dahlias that are 6 feet tall. Try to pick a variety that's about the height of what you want.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say pay most attention to plant height. I think that's a huge deal. I'm showing you Penn Hill watermelon right now just because
that's not short.
Because that's not short. Penn Hill watermelon is probably the tallest dahlia I've ever grown. I think last year was about 8 or 9 feet tall along the house. So anyway, she's a beauty, but you know, you sacrifice, I will only probably get, I don't know, 5 or 6 flowers maybe out of this plant if I'm lucky. So, I would say try a variety of different ones so that you get a feel for what really works for you and what you like, because you might decide that you are happy to give up some of the really showy size for more flowers.
Yeah. I've never had leafhoppers. I can't answer this one. Do you have?
I've never had leafhoppers either, actually. Sorry, Keith. We're not much. Do you have? Is that something you've got in your insect roundup on the? I know you've got a great article on insect management on Longfield. Do you have leafhoppers included in there?
I don't think I put leafhoppers in there.
Okay.
I mean, there's yet again another thing that loves to chew on dahlias.
Right.
Well, that's a good question, actually.
Yeah, it is. And so my understanding of the powdery mildew, whether that will make it more prone to get in future years, if it's cleaned up. I mean, my understanding is that powdery mildew can get carried over in the tissue from year to year, but that technically that shouldn't be on the tubers. But what I'm going to say here, you girl gal, is that I was just telling Kath before that this year when I decide which dahlias I'm going to store, I'm going to be far more judicious about what I actually store, because I do think in some cases I'm carrying, I mean, keep in mind that like those dahlias that I have that have powdery mildew, those are not going to be the strongest plants necessarily because they've been affected by this disease all year. They're just not going to be necessarily as healthy. So I think this fall, I am only going to save the dahlias that are in good shape and healthy, or that I mean, there might be a couple that I'll be worried I just won't find again. And the rest I'm going to restock and get new dahlias. Kath, you got all new dahlias this year, right?
Yeah, I only kept usually I keep a lot, and I probably kept 4 varieties. I pitched everything. I had just such a bad year. The plants were not healthy. They were so disappointing. And who knows why? Could they have had a virus? I don't know what was the deal. Might have been just the weather, but I was so disgusted. I just started over. And you saw the picture. I'm having a really good year. I don't know why, but it could be, I don't know. You wait all year. It's worth it, I think, to invest in good plant material.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Maybe grow fewer.
Well, I don't even know. What is it? I didn't hear you. I couldn't hear that. Must be breaking up. What is this order fewer, grow fewer thing? When should we order dahlias, Kath?
January.
Yep.
At no later, unless you just are fine with, the standard varieties. Like you probably can find Cafe Au Lait now anytime. But if you're looking for something special, they can be bought up by February.
Yeah.
Yep.
For sure.
So
good. All right. Well, you guys listen, I will go through, and if there's any questions, I'll try to hit some of those up later on tonight in the comments and try to answer some if I can help with anything. But I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys are enjoying your. If you guys, by the way, keep leaving comments and let me know what your favorite dahlia is that you're growing this year.
Absolutely.
Because we
need
always
more.
want to know. Yep. So make sure you let us know what is your favorite, because we're gonna check that out. And thank you all for joining us. Kath, thank you for imparting your dahlia wisdom
you
on
too.
us, and for putting my staking system to utter shame.
Well, try a few in your vegetable garden next year, maybe.
Yeah, well, yes, probably. Well, I mean, that would be, then I could have more. So
you could probably fit some along that fence that you have.
That's where I put the ones that I grew from seed this year, is over there. So yes, it worked well. So we could probably do that.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Dangerous territory. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and joining us. Keep enjoying those dahlias. You're gonna have them right up until frost. So
yeah, we have another month.
This is the time to go nuts with them and enjoy them, and cut them and bring them inside and
give them away.
Enjoy them.
Give them to people.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Enjoy them, because they don't live forever on the plant. So you might as well bring some in to enjoy for yourself too. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. And we'll catch up with you guys in the comments, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again, Kath. Appreciate it.
See you, Erin.
All right. Bye, everybody.